like to invite Peggy Compton to present our final and highest award in the college, the Nathan B. Eddy Award.
Good morning. It gives me great pleasure to introduce my mentor, Walter Ling, this year's recipient of the Nelson B. Eddy Award. And, oops, I went too far. Wait a minute. There's the first slide. Walter not only is winning this wonderful award and being recognized for his work at this meeting this year, but he also is putting out a book, and I just wanted to point that out, that really has pulled together the wisdom of what he's learned about working with addicts over the years, working with the medications we use to treat addicts over the years, and really has put together a really lovely book describing not only for people who are suffering with addiction, but with clinicians who are treating people with addiction and people who just want to learn more about the disease. A really lovely read, and I really will encourage you all to take a look at it if you have a chance. Mastering the Addicted Brain. And when I think about Walter, I think of him as a master of the addicted brain. He really has spent his career learning and learning from addicts, learning from scientists, learning from others what the disease of addiction is all about. And as I think about masters, I of course think about Master Yoda and the wonderful quotes that Yoda has provided for us. And people who've worked with Walter and know Walter as a colleague know that he also has quotes that we all kind of hang on to. And some of us who work closely with him call them Lingisms, that he has certain sayings that really communicate a lot with a few words. And so I'm going to be sharing some of those with you as well. I think that these two quotes, though, from Master Yoda really describe Walter's approach to life and his accomplishments across his career. In a dark place we find ourselves, a little more knowledge lights the way, and he really has given so much knowledge, and when he finds himself in a dark place, that's how he comes to understand, is to really grow his knowledge. And also, when we think about the path that his career has taken, difficult to see, always in motion is the future, because you just don't know what's quite ahead of you. Walter kind of came to addiction through an interesting story, and I won't go through it in great detail because I'm sure he'll talk a little bit about that, but he was actually an expert in childhood depression and accepted a job interview with the VA, VA hospital in Sepulveda in California. Took a job not understanding that the VA didn't treat children or adolescents. So he came into a setting that was really, outside of where his expertise landed. And he ended up working with addicts because he had a colleague who was overseeing the methadone clinic that was taking a vacation and needed somebody to cover the clinic. Walter came and covered the clinic, and they really basically never let him leave. So it was almost a series of accidents that brought him to his work with opiate addiction. And in those 3 weeks that he had to cover the methadone clinic, he knew he didn't really know these patients well. And so he sat down with 100 patients and just kind of listened to their stories to better understood. He became interested in the broken life stories of addicted patients and how to make them whole again. He wanted to find out what they were like psychiatrically. Very little work had been done at that point in time to really understand the disease of addiction. There really wasn't a DSM diagnosis for it. So he took it upon himself to sit in that place of darkness to learn by just listening to their stories. I think we all best know Walter for his work in clinical trials of medication development, and we talk about the medications that are currently available for the treatment of addiction. He really has been seminal in the work in developing all of those medications. LAM, he did a lot of work with back in the early 70s in comparison to methadone. Methadone was the only thing out there at the time. He was also instrumental in the initial trials of buprenorphine and has continued to do a lot of work in the use of this medication to treat opiate addiction. Also did key work in the development of naltrexone. So when we think about our currently accepted medication-assisted therapies, methadone, buprenorphine, naltrexone, LAM, which is no longer used but was for quite a while, he was really instrumental in pulling together the data that provide the evidence for us using these treatments that are so effective in managing addictive disease. He also has done a fair amount of work looking at pharmacotherapies for the treatment of stimulant disorders. So with cocaine abuse and methamphetamine abuse, he's done a lot of work with his colleagues at UCLA looking at different medications to treat stimulant use as well. So his understanding of clinical trials and doing clinical trials in substance-using populations is really incomparable. There are very few people in the field that understand doing clinical trials in these populations as well as he does. But being such an expert in the use of medications to treat addiction, some of the things that he has observed, not only are there no perfect medications, there are not even good medications or bad medications. There are just right and wrong ways to use a medication. And in the long term, a medication that helps the addict's mind off his or her daily dose of opioids, prescribed or otherwise, is a good thing. It frees patients from their daily preoccupation with their medications so they can focus on doing different non-drug associated things so their lives can turn out differently. And he understands that detoxification may be good for a lot of things, but staying off drugs is not one of them. It's appreciated that really the use of medications is instrumental in helping patients maintain sobriety. But although he's a very expert in the use of medications, he also really appreciates the role of behavioral approaches in treating addiction. In the end, every life is a story, and every addicted life is a broken story. We have to listen and find out where the story went off track and do our best to help make it whole. Language is our currency. That is our job. He also tells junior people, you will learn a lot about motivational interviewing and counseling, but don't worry about any of the details. Just be nice to your patients. And he observes clearly, talk is cheap and it works. So even though this is a man with expertise in the use of medications, he really also appreciates the importance of these behavioral sorts of interventions and just listening to patients and treating them with respect. Because of his expertise, or related to his expertise in doing clinical trials, he was the director of the Pacific Region Node of the Clinical Trial Network, NIDA's Clinical Trial Network program from 1999 to 2015, and I've just put up here a few of the publications and many publications that came out of that work and highlight the success of that particular node in the Clinical Trials Network. And in doing the work, and what Clinical Trials Network did was take a lot of medication sorts of strategies, bringing them into the actual clinical setting, into the treatment setting. And so his expertise on addiction treatment is quite relevant and pronounced in the work the Clinical Trials Network that node did. And some of his observations on addiction treatment: you can't stay off drugs for long if you don't build a sane and meaningful other-centered life, one that is based on consideration of people besides yourself, and you cannot build a sane and meaningful life if you don't stay off drugs. We can sum up overcoming addiction in one sentence. It replaces the search for hedonic happiness with the effort to attain eudaimonic happiness, which is happiness from within. And I really like that addiction treatment is essentially turning tax eaters into taxpayers. Okay. Walter was also the founding director of the Integrated Substance Abuse Program's ISAP at UCLA, which was he was the director from 1999 to 2016, and this was a particularly a lot of work was done in this center, and that's actually where I received some of my mentorship. Over 304 funded research projects, over almost 800 publications, and the work done within this within ISAP covered many broad areas of study, not just the clinical trials for treatments of substance use disorder medications, but also criminal justice populations, program evaluation services, healthcare reform and integration of substance use services into primary care, health services, HIV-related behavioral interventions, natural history, treatment processes and outcome, substance use epidemiology, training and dissemination, and treatment services. So there was a broad spectrum of areas of research that bloomed and really blossomed under Dr. Ling's leadership. And that work is extended internationally as well, and this is just kind of a pretty picture here, a map of the different countries where some of the work and the training, especially that Dr. Ling and his group with ISAP have been engaged in. Early on, he recognized the specialty of addiction medicine, and his observations on addiction treatment in the United States, I think, are particularly powerful. Much addiction treatment has previously been provided by addiction specialists will be provided in the general medical clinics by family practitioners, pediatrics, and other primary care physicians. This is a quote from a paper he did back in the early 70s, recognizing where we are going now and where substance use services have moved away from kind of a specialty area and into primary care. Many physicians prefer not to treat addicts, but the reality is that addicts are not easy to avoid. And in the U.S., we view addiction as both a disease and a sin. Because it's a disease, we treat it. Because it's a sin, we don't treat it very well. And I think that's a very good description of how substance use treatment has been approached in this country. Finally, just to close with a couple other Yoda quotes that I think really resonate with things that Walter have said. Yoda says, "You will only find what you bring in." Walter says that the truth is that addicts and I live in the same world. They know prejudice, rejection, isolation, things that I can identify with. Another thing is that if you treat them like real people, they are genuinely grateful. Yoda says, "This one, a long time I have watched. All his life he has looked away, to the future, to the horizon." Walter says, "I think we should try not to be too sure what we get before we start something. If we insist on knowing what is at the end of the rainbow, we deprive ourselves of the unseen miracles along the way." And I think this quote probably captures Walter's approach to life in a good way. "My only guide has been to not do anything that would make me feel sheepish if someone told my mother about it." So with that, I just want to welcome Dr. Ling to the stage and congratulate him for this wonderful award.
Actually, I think I have more than a few words. I should have some slides. It's customary in the U.S. They have to do disclosure first. We are not that far from the border, so do that. The next, please. Do I advance this? Now, first of all, obviously, a big thanks to Peggy. Without Peggy, none of this would have happened. And you think between me and Peggy, things ought to be pretty honky-dory, easy. Well, it's not always like that. So I said to Peggy, well, send me a few pictures. I need them for the talk. She said, no, I don't like pictures. I don't like taking pictures. So a week went by, nothing happened. So I sent an email, said, look, I spent hours looking through some old pictures, and these are the ones I can only find. And she sent me an email, and I said, in the meantime, I got myself a king in my neck. So Peggy wrote back and said, well, too bad about the king in your neck. But one of the two pictures you sent wasn't me. I said, well, okay. So that's the way things go. Now, besides Peggy, I really want to thank Nora and Frank. They wrote letters of support. And of course, thank all my friends and members of the fan club who perjured themselves and provided odd facts in support of this. And I mean, obviously, big thanks to CPDD and the nominating committee. And closer to home, you could count from Adam to Emperor Huang to my parents, my wife, kids, and now grandkids. So everybody. But actually, most of all, it's thanks to you. Now, that might come as a surprise to you. The thing is, in a moment you'll see that it's really got something to do with you about this whole thing. And if you see your picture on the slides, or you hear your name, or you hear your name of someone you know, or someone you should know, or even if you don't, it's just a slight oversight, because it's all about all of us. And I was trying to show you that our story is actually your story. Another title of the talk will be, This is Your Life. I'm only the storyteller. The story is yours. So now first a confession. This is really not my thing. I wasn't brought up this way. The two people that have most influence on my life are my mother and Jim Clapp. And they're both very low-key people. My mother would say, look, just don't get carried away, okay? Do your thing. And, Jim would be the same thing. I asked him about, well, Jim Clapp wrote a little commentary for that little book they put together. And the editor wanted to know what kind of attribution they should put at the end of his name. And he wrote back, say, retire. I mean, that's the kind of people like I hang around with Tommy, so you could understand. So it really is not my thing to do. It's just not like I have any problem talking to you or anything. I'm not particularly that shy, but talking about we did this, we did that, is always uncomfortable. Now, I have a little confession, but don't take it as my suggestion. I think I'm the only Eddie Award recipient that has never held an office at CPDD. It's running for office is not my thing. I'm not trying to encourage you to do that, okay? So the news came. I was in Bangkok hanging out with Robert. But we thought we would have a good time by ourselves. And landed call and talk about this. My first reaction, oh no. Don't do that. But Robert said, well, you can't do that. This is great honor, you should do that. And so my next thought was, well, CPDD is a great organization. You should be really thankful about this. But you all know that CPDD may be great, but not perfect. And sooner or later, it's going to make a mistake. And besides, if you live long enough, something's going to happen to you. So I think, well. But when we start to think about it, I start to really feel like, there are not many opportunities that a guy gets to be able to stay in front of a bunch of people or his friends and tell them how much they make a difference in his life and how much he appreciates that. And then to share a few memories. So that is in that spirit, I'm trying to prepare this talk. The question that came to mind was, well, how did we get here? So that's part of the title. Is it a series of accidents, or are they angels? And then, of course, well, what it is that we did anyway. I mean, what did we do anyway? I think at one point, Rick had said we should have a talk entitled 40 Years of Hit Parade. Well, that sounds pretty good. Not exactly sure what we're going to say. And I was like, well, at the end of the day, what is it anyway? So I happened to have a bottle cap that I carried my job online. And so I thought, well, all right, part of that should be a man who get his life philosophy from a bottle cap. And at some point, I'll show you what the bottle cap says. So now, so what I'm going to do is to tell you a few stories. And you can then decide, or maybe we can have a vote about whether they are is a series of accidents or whether they're angels. See. So we begin with where I came from. I mean, all of you know I came from my mother. That's pretty hard to argue. But I grew up in Thailand. And so my early education was actually in Chinese. But periodically, Thailand went through a period of making the country great again. And a higher education in Chinese became pretty difficult. So you can either go to a Thai higher education, or you got to find yourself something to do. So my brother ended up going to a Thai school, Thai university, and I ended up learning English in a garage school, a school that's convened in Dr. Waddell's garage because he had 2 kids. They are just 6 or 7 school age. They are too young to be sent back to the US. So here's a kid grow up there. I ended up with a secondary education in English. Then I went to high school in Singapore. Now there was a plan actually. The idea was like I would then come to Walla Walla, Washington, or Nguyen, California, and then ended up at Loma Linda University Medical School. That sounds like a pretty good plan. Well, I ended up going to medical school in Thailand. And the reason is also during periods of making Thailand great, the country's constitution suspended. It's an absolute military rule. The guy who ran the country also appointed himself the rector of the university. And nobody says no to the Supreme Commander. And a lot of American graduated doctors got sent home because they couldn't pass the local exam with a lot of questions on tropical medicine like tapeworms and malaria and elephantiasis. And when you can't do that, you got to go home after a year. And Dr. Waddell, the medical director of the huge, and at that time probably the most famous hospital run by the church, started to worry that our church-run hospital will end up in the hands of a Buddhist running it. So the solution is to get one of our own boys to go to medical school here. And Waters looked like a good candidate to do that. So here I am at the medical school, whose rector, remember, is the Iron Man of Southeast Asia. And I could hardly speak Thai. But the interesting thing is, it was okay with the university. Like a kid would use English for his primary language of communication throughout college and pre-med and medical school. Now that's really tolerance, if you want. I was the only student doing that out of the whole university and the whole medical school. Now, of course, tolerance has its limits. So it came time graduation, they are not going to give an honorary degree to a kid with a foreign name. So get him to get a Thai name, all right? No objection to that. Nobody says no. But to get a Thai name, you have to become a Thai citizen. And ordinarily, that will take a few years, actually, at least a couple of years. Fortunately, when you had a Supreme Commander running things, we can just make a declaration from the Prime Minister's office, and everything's fine, done. So here you see me getting a degree from the king. Now, who would have guessed, like a kid like that, 40 years later, I'd be back being good friends with his daughter, the princess, and taking care of his grandson. Now, you can say water is just an accident, you know? Or you can listen to my mother and argue that there's an angel. Well, and if you have been there more recently, I was getting some kind of award from the king's sister. And if you want to know about a funny press conference, you should be there. Here's a guy giving a press conference, constantly asking the audience, what was the word I was looking for? So now I come to St. Louis. The first lady I ran into was the lady next to the picture with the bridge, Frida Inns. Frida take a look at me and said, you water? I said, yes. He said, oh, Dr. Louis said I should take care of you. I said, oh, okay. She said, you settle? Yes. All right, tomorrow morning I'll pick you up. We have breakfast at 8 and go to church. Yes, Frida. So my first rotation was the city hospital. And I discovered that I come up at the end, finish work at the end of the day, around midnight, across the street from Pruitt-Igoe, the most famous housing project. And I'm waiting for the bus, and then suddenly realized that the bus was going on the side because people were driving on the wrong side of the street. So I pleaded with Frida, I gotta buy a car. So, okay, you got a pretty good reason. What do you want? What do you want to buy? There's this new thing called Mustang. Mustang? She said, you got a Volkswagen. So I got a Volkswagen. But it didn't really matter because pretty soon you can't remember where you park your car anyway. As an intern at Barnes Hospital, you're working day and night, you know? So it doesn't matter what kind of car you got. Then when my attending, Stanley Wall said, what are you working too hard? Let me introduce you to some nice girls. So there's this nice young school teacher who's volunteering at the children's hospital, helping the sick kids with their homework. Okay, that's nice. Pretty soon I'm going out with this young, school teacher with Frida's approval, actually. And all my friends started to say, Walter, you're going to end up marrying that girl, staying here. And me, you guys, you don't understand. No way, absolutely no way. I'm here on a training visa. I have a J visa. At the end of the training, I'm going home. And we both know it. So it's understood between us. And besides, I can't come back. I can't even apply to come back for 2 years. What are you talking about? Well, there is this other doctor, my attending, Herb Rosenbaum. Now, besides Herb Rosenbaum, you might remember a senator from Missouri called Tom Egerton, who was the running mate of McGavin. And Tom Egerton withdrew from from running for the vice president because he was hospitalized for depression at Barnes Hospital. And Herb Rosenbaum was his doctor. Also, they were good friends. So Herb Rosenbaum kind of took a liking to me and thought I should stay and join him. But I think he actually liked me much better. So pretty soon, there's a bill in the Senate introduced. You saw that little thing called Bill 2188 introduced in the Senate for the relief of Dr. Walter Ling. It should be considered that his 2 years of foreign residency has hereby been fulfilled. So I don't have to leave. So obviously my friends will end up marrying me and have to stay. Now I'm in Los Angeles. Well, the idea was I was trained in neurology and psychiatry. And so I will be doing a prospective study of dementia. I was always interested in the borderland between psychiatry and neurology. And the VA was building a new nursing home. There would be lots of old folks. And the British had just developed a cell count technique. For the first time, we can quantify cell loss in the temporal horn. That sounds like a really good plan. So here I am out at Sepulveda, waiting for the building to finish. In the meantime, so generally creating trouble because everybody in the hospital was diagnosed as schizophrenia, and this kid come up from St. Louis, said, nah, this is an old alcoholics, get him out here. And then pretty soon, all the other staff were getting irritated because they have to admit new patients. Then I ended up running the methadone clinic. As Peggy told you, the doctor who was running a clinic at Sepulveda at that time, Sepulveda had one of the 4 pilot methadone clinics in the VA. So one Friday, the doctor packed up his stuff he had in Navajo, said, I am not going to come back, and left. Well, our big chief, Tony Bruns, called me in and said, well, you got to help me. I'm going to Hawaii for a mindfulness conference. Yes, they did have mindfulness conference even then. So he said, but I'm going to be gone only 2 weeks. Take over the methadone clinic for me for 2 weeks. And when I come back, I'll be grateful and you can go back and do whatever. Well, okay, I could do anything for 2 weeks, So 2 weeks went by, Tony came back. Unbeknown to me, the methadone clinic staff behind my back went and petitioned him to keep me. Well, the building was not finished yet anyway, so they had not much else to do. And actually, this ad is kind of interesting in a way, Everybody called them sociopaths, and probably half of them were, but a bunch of them were alcoholics, actually. And, they all talk about being depressed, but actually their incidence of depression wasn't any other different from the general psychiatric population. And also, very few of them were actually crazy. Not too many schizophrenics around, which was at that time probably 98% of the diagnosis carried by the VA patients. So, okay, let's see what's going on here. And then one day, Jim Klett and Sam came to visit. And I have to say the world changed. Now, you see the picture of Sam came, the black and white picture, and Jim Klett, the one below him. They had just promised Dr. Jaffe. Well, he said, yeah. So apparently they had agreed to try to organize a LAM cooperative study in the VA. And they have written a protocol with Dr. Jaffe's blessing of funding it in the VA. And so they started to talk to clinics, starting from New York, and work their way across the country to Palo Alto, California. Palo Alto was then the flagship program of the VA, talking to them about taking on doing this cooperative LAM study. And then up to Palo Alto, they thought it'd be nice to go down to Southern California, take in some sunshine and good food, and visit their old pal, Tony, and then go home. And so they came down and they told Tony what they were doing. And Tony said, we should go and talk to this kid, Water. He seemed to be having a great time over the methadone clinic. I don't know what's happening. The other guy before used to grumble all the time about running the clinic, and he seemed to just having a great time. And the staff was seemed to have a great time. So they came over and explained what they were going to do. And when they finished, they said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, I don't see why we couldn't do it. They said, you know anyone else that might do it? I said, well, if I call Charlie, which is nicknamed Crazy Charlie, who came from Thailand, went to school in Australia, and spent the last 6 months of his residency with me. I said, if we talk Charlie, he probably say yes, because he just finished his residency running the methadone clinic down the street in Brentwood. So we called Charlie, and Charlie said, if Wallace said we do it, we'll do it. Now, we didn't know at the time. It turned out that we were the only people that say, yes, we can do it. No one else from New York to California said they could do it, except one guy in St. Louis, Power T guy. He said, no, I wouldn't want to do it, but if someone else would take on doing it, I wouldn't mind become part of it. And that was it. Now, probably we say, sure, we don't see a reason we couldn't do it because we had never done anything like that before. And we have zero idea what it was like to do a study with addicts. But we thought, oh, sure, we can do that. And as they said, the rest is history. And that was how we started the LAM study, and that's how I started my career, you can call it, in addiction. Frank Varchi told me that he counted something like 30 publications from the LAM. I couldn't remember we had that many. But we did do really a big series of studies. Now, Peggy showed you some of the studies, but actually, if you look at those publications, the texts are actually not part of the text. They're just names of the people that were involved in the trials. And to me, those are the important things. You look at this, because those are times I want you to remember those pictures because I want to come back to them. And if you look at those, the small prints are all just series of names. So you know what you get is you get to know the who's who in drug abuse at that time. There weren't too many people in clinical trials, and all of them, well, you start with J. Jaffe there, you get people like Chuck O'Brien and Herb involved in that, Bob Schuster, Benny Prim, and then we get this group in Baltimore called Friends that they administer our grants. And the picture on the corner, you see me and Jim Craig. Actually, we took a tour around the world for the State Department during Nixon White House. Because the State Department was criticized for spending all its money on law enforcement and not enough on treatment. And since they cannot spend money domestically, we were asked to go around the world to see whether there were any worthwhile projects to support. I remember Herb and I think Bob Newman and Herb Cleaver went to Hong Kong, and Peter Knott went to Egypt to see a guy trying to treat heroin addict with minute doses of insulin. And Jim and I just went around the world, and I wanted to show you the kind of like a flag. It was the Hong Kong group in support of, these are post-treatment support groups. And if we have time, I'll tell you that story, but maybe later. Well, right around this time, I've been out of neurology and psychiatry clinical practice for a while, and I really started to worry. Because you're trained as a clinician and you've been doing this research, which is fine, but you start to worry about losing your skill. And so I start to tell the hospital director about my worries. I said, maybe I should start a small practice if you don't mind. He said, well, you seem like you're taking care of things. You have to be sure, I do that, fine. So I started a little practice, joining a group of neurologists at White Memorial, which is Seventh-day Adventist. And since I went to their school, I was part of it. And I began to have, meet friends in the practice world. And now I'm actually having what the Thais call two legs in two bowls. Keeping up the research, keeping up the practice. I was supposed to be doing that maybe half a day or a week. And within a few months, I was the busiest guy in the whole practice group. I was driving around 100 miles a day throughout the county. Charlie and I were probably two of the first doctors that kept a car phone in our car. The transmitter took out half the trunk. The hospital, I know all the night nurses better than the day nurses, and they used to call me the midnight cowboy because I'm always making rounds right after midnight. And then we have a lot of nice parties on the one hand, and then on the research end, we start to engage people like David Smith and the NIDA group. And then, my kids were having a good time going bananas at parties. Then, we got Steve and Peggy show up and join us. And we start to work with the Matrix group. And then, Steve, Alice joined, and Doug England and Rick got a grant to run a project comparing LAM to methadone. But we couldn't find anybody that would rent us space to do it. So we ended up having to buy a building. The building was in default, and the bank wouldn't let them renew the lease, and the county wouldn't renew the contract without the lease. So it's like you are caught in an impossible position. We ended up having to buy a building. Alan Lashner came out to visit. I was very proud. Took Alan to see the building. He said, "Well, I always thought you're a pretty good researcher. I'm not so sure about your investment." Fortunately, we did okay. That was about the time when we start to engage with the VA. And the lower picture you see General McCaffrey came up and give us some kind of award for, I forgot what we did with the vets. And then we start to form a group called ISAP on the one hand and Matrix on the other. And Steve started to run his clinic, probably at one of the world's sleaziest corners, Hollywood and Vine. But we try to make things sound a lot better by telling people that those two girls walking in front of the star were actually our research assistants, taking a lunch break, that make people think like we were doing okay. And then there was the days when we formed ISAP, and then we ended up doing pen studies. I don't know if you can see that in the lower corner, there's a picture of a bucket, ice, that Peggy used to do pen studies, an ice bucket. But we were really trying to be precise and good scientists. So we get a bucket from Jason White's horse farm from Australia, because the original work was done on an imperial bucket, gallon bucket, not this US gallon bucket. So there you see that. And of course, Peggy ended up being the cover girl on Science. That's Peggy's hand in the Science cover. So Steve's running this great sleazy clinic down in Hollywood, and Peggy's doing all the pen studies. And we are now into the years of Matrix and ISAP. Now, what you don't realize is like all this is actually just prep work for the next phase. Because the next thing I know, I woke up one day and we're into buprenorphine work. I got a call from NIDA, said, "Listen, we are going to form a new group of research clinics called the Treatment Research Units, and we want you to come back and do that." Well, okay. By that time, I figured I was making enough money to send my kids to college. And the worst thing you have to tell your kids is that things are really bad. You guys have to go to UCLA. That's not really that bad, So we started buprenorphine work, and Ed Johnson came out and helped me fix the first set of buprenorphine, because the thing came in a powder, and you're supposed to make it into 30% alcohol. So Ed came out to do that. Now, clearly the man that gave us the most support throughout the buprenorphine years was Alan Lashner. But the man that I did most work with in buprenorphine is Frank Varchi, clearly Frank. We did a whole series of studies doing all kinds of things. And from the buprenorphine work, we moved into doing things from the university and the clinics into primary care and into the community. Now, those were the years, the buprenorphine years were really who's who in buprenorphine. I don't think you need any introduction to those guys in the picture. John Lewis, Charles, and a bunch of them, all these people on there, well, bless Eddie. Eddie just passed away last week, 102. Not bad, really, And, I say Dr. Jeff is here, and then Charles is here. So now, of course, these are all the old pioneers buprenorphine. But there are also younger ones. And that's how you learn about things. People say there are two ways to be good at something. You either know a lot about what you're doing, or you know a lot of people who knows a lot about what you're doing. And I tend to be, knowing a lot of people who know a lot, really. There aren't too many things about people not being there. I cannot call up Dan Jasinski or Ed or Chris Chaplin, and they would tell me everything. And if I really want to do something about behavior science, I'll call Sharon, and she would tell me. Now, if I call Imagine Creed, she would not only tell me everything about it, she also sent me a stack of reprints to read. Now, that brings us into the CTN years. And that, we are now really into today now. And most of you, a lot of you are really CTN folks, so you know. Now, the leadership in CTN, clearly, Nora's been giving us a guiding hand. You know that CTN started when Adam was there and Frank and Tim kind of were the early days. But clearly today, Nora and Betty are the one guiding the CTN. And we did really do a bunch of things in the CTN, and a lot of you are part of it, so you all know. And the big picture, picture with a lot of people in the corner, are really some of the people that are very involved in running the CTN. Now, of course, you have to have a very meeting on very forward, and then there are more people. So it brings us now to more or less where we are now. And you have to say, well, looking back, what do we learn? What's what did these 40 years mean? What are some of the lessons? Well, I think my first lesson is it's all people, really. Leo Hollister and Jim Craig were the first two that said to me, Walter, we need to credit the people who do the work. And one of the things they taught me was early on, as you know, many people had a VA affiliation. They're based at the VA. But they often list their university affiliation and they forgot mention the VA. So Leo and Jim were saying, Walter, we are going to credit the VA in order. And if you go back and look at our publications, we always mention VA. And Jim, I, of course, also learned some tricks about, we used to say we run meetings at the back of the envelope, and that's a very good reason for it. Because in those days, travel was a big deal. Going to a meeting was a big deal. So the chiefs would come to a meeting, but we really want the people who do the work come to the meeting. So the way to do that is to send them a preliminary agenda, tell them that we're going to start the meeting at 7:30 on a Sunday morning, and they would say they're too busy to come, so they send their underlings, which are really the people we want to come. And then, of course, we don't start the meeting until 9 o'clock, and then we have a nice evening, and then we really got the people we wanted to come. So there are a few tricks I learned, but crediting people who support you, I think, was a big lesson, not to forget them. But in terms of research, there are many reasons. If you look back to the picture of the VA, with a bunch of, when I first came out, I didn't know anything about research. But there were two advisory groups at the VA at the time. One was advisory group to the cooperative study program, and the other was advisory group to Dr. Joseph Baker, the director of mental health. And now the two groups overlap in their membership. But there were people like Leo Hollister, Evan Goldstein, Phil May, Frank Eyre, Jonathan Cole, John Overall, Jim Craig, Doug McNair. These are people, you can learn more psychopharmacology from Leo Hollister in the course of an evening with dinner or over a drink. And you learn more about research design from a guy like Jim Craig over a beer. You learn about instrumentation. You can learn better from a guy like John Overall, who was the one that invented BPRS, so we're still using. So I was like going to 3 postdocs all at once, And you have to be really super, super dumb to not learn. You really have to make major efforts not to learn. So opportunities come down and you ask yourself, well, how did that happen? You know, it's just a bunch of things. So now, one of the probably the best lessons I learned from those old guys was like probably more important to find out why people drop out of your study than why they get into the study. So we meticulously document why people drop out. And I think we started on the first Lamb study, and 15 years later, when Lamb came up for NDA, I think Kurt Wright said that the reviewers thought that the reason for dropout was some of the best data that they had seen. So that was done 15 years earlier. And now, of course, you are thankful to people like Dr. Jeffrey who give you the resource to do it and leave you alone. And you say, hey, they say, as long as you guys do a good job, fine. You know, I think some of you remember the joke that I had with Jerry, the private joke about if it weren't for him, I would have been a rich, comfortable, prosperous neurologist in Beverly Hills. And see what I'm doing now. And he says, what are you fine? Don't complain. Stop complaining. But it's the people that give you the support and all that. And that's always the lesson I learned. Now, along the way, we try to solve some of the problems. We devised the TES, basically because of our argument about what to do with missing urine. And actually, it was Jim Craig's wife, who was really quite a statistician in her own right. Said, why don't you guys stop arguing about missing urine? Just give them credit for having a negative urine. It's like, earning a point. And now people had said, well, you guys are just giving, it means you rate missing urine as positive. That's not the idea. The idea was that in order to get a negative urine, it's a commitment to follow a treatment program. You have to promise to come to the clinic when you're supposed to come, give a urine sample when you're asked, and the urine sample you give has to be negative. It's the commitment to a treatment program. It's not just a negative urine. So those things, the night before we gave the first training to doctors about buprenorphine. So Dan West and I was sitting at the bar. Somehow we always end up at the bar. I don't know why, but that's how things went. And talking about what are we really going to tell the doctors. And probably the most important things we agree on was that we should feed the kids when they're hungry. So the thing is, how do you make doctors give buprenorphine to patients when they're really, really sick? If they're really, really sick, they would do well and appreciate. So that's how the cows was born. We took the two scales that were in existence there, called the ours and the sows, and there were many overlapping items. We just crossed out the overlapping ones, and it literally was on the back of a napkin. And people often joke about we developed the cows over 2 beers. Well, that was wrong. Actually, 4 beers, because each of us had 2 beers. So, but that was how it goes. And more recently, we developed the TEA, which is simply put, you want to find out how patients are doing, ask them. That's it. That tell you. So, what are the lessons that I have learned in the last 4 years? Well, it is a small world. That's really what it is. I started off in Thailand, and you see our princess there. It's always nice when you do work with the support of the princess. You know, it's just nice to have people support you. But in the other picture, you see that we actually engage people in the U.S. Embassy and the local mental health people. The Thais actually dedicated, you see the picture of the hospital, they dedicated a whole wing of the hospital for our research. I think it's a shame that we never follow up with that thing. And you see Alan Lessner almost single-handedly trying to handle the research triangle. But we sent him a support group anyway underneath, you can see. It gave me a chance to go back to Thailand, and one of the few times I got to see my brother with a picture taken. And the corner thing was Panapa, the woman. Unfortunately, Panapa couldn't get a visa in time to come here. And Panapa was the woman that says, nobody does anything with water in Thailand without Panapa. Okay. So, and then the bottom picture you see more recently, Rob and I having dinner with the princess and her buddies. And then, of course, you see Steve trying to coach an elephant into doing something. I can't remember what it was he's trying to do, but there's Steve trying to feed an elephant. I have more embarrassing pictures, but I'm not going to show them. Then we ended up going to Vietnam. As Peggy mentioned to you, we extended to Taiwan, Taipei, and then you ended up in China. Well, when in China, you deal with the Shanghai group, and you see Betty and Ming Zhao and me in Shanghai, and more recently, the picture that below that on the right-hand corner, I'm trying to introduce Maduka to go over there and do some work in depression. That'd be fun. And Sandy going to Macau, and you see Tom McKellen pointing thing. It's one of the few times that Tom isn't sick. Tom is famous for being sick when he's on the road. So it's one of the few times that he wasn't sick. And Chris and I were sitting on the steps after drinking a fair amount of beer from a bowl like a lady gave to us in the Tiananmen Square. And then we ended up going to Mongolia. The tent that we're having that looked like it's a 2,000-year-old yurt powered by solar, mind you. There's a solar power outside of the tent. Then, of course, we went out south to the Ayers Rock, and Charles took us on a helicopter ride around the rock, and then we end up having this thing called dinner of the, the dinner of the Song of Silence out in the desert. Now the picture in the other corner with a lot of people is where East meets West. See, here we are taking a picture in Istanbul. We're actually looking over Asia. And the picture right next to it is Rick and Al are in Iraq trying to survey what kind of drugs are being used there. And then you see Warner Thomas to remind us that the TreatNet, this whole system, the TreatNet was born there. So it's all about people around the world. Now, of course, we not only go over the world, the people from all over the world also come over here and visit. And you see that starting to the, just below the thing, say ISAP, these are group come over here for training, for meeting, and then the next go clockwise. They come over to the house, hang out in the house. They meet some of the riffraffs of our group. They bring their postdocs. They bring the family, and then they got married here. And I think Ming over there taking over the kitchen. The Miss Thailand, who's also a psychiatrist, brought her mother. And Tom, who's always promised to come up to the house for dinner, I think he finally managed to come up in time for dessert, which he thought was really doing well. And it's always good to see Charles there. Now, you see the Chinese character in the middle. It means family, and it means home. So it's a family around the world, and I think it's a home. And so they are. It's all these people who's all over the world, and they're also right at home. So the Lings, of course, have grown in the meantime. My kids somehow pulled off a 50th wedding anniversary party for us. I have no idea how they did it, but it was a complete surprise. Now these days, when they are looking for Dr. Ling, they're actually looking for Pamela. not her father. And all the kids are married and have their own kids. Now, the Lings actually have accomplished two really major missions. We have, mainly have 4 daughters, but now we have 4 grandsons. And of course, we have 2 granddaughters too, but we now have 4 grandsons. And we also have achieved, I believe, a real infusion of height. All the son-in-laws are 6 and over. And I think the grandkids are going to be big. So we've done okay, Now, the extended family has also done well. You see, starting in the middle, I can never show enough pictures of Peggy and Steve. Peggy's gone on, as you all know, mentor a whole generation of nurses and nurse practitioners who still keep up with her research. And Steve's got his whole, I don't know, you call it a gang or a institute, whatever you like. The lower picture was actually taken recently, a site visit. So when they have site visits, you know that they're doing okay. The local group is being site visited for a new grant, so they're doing fine. Tom, the guy in the close to the middle, is our local entrepreneur, homegrown entrepreneur. He's doing training over the world. The picture above him, on the top, I think that was in Cairo, I think. And the one next to it is in Hawaii, and the one that with all the red shirts is in some kind of island somewhere. I think it's Guam or it's a different island. And then if you, the local group are still trying to impress on people that we are, in fact, like the mafia. You can only join and you can't quit. And in our effort in the community, because these days we're all thinking about doing work in the community, the community. Well, Ernie, who was part of our community-based buprenorphine research, took the first few dollars we gave him, married his sweetheart. You saw the thing in the circle, he and his sweetheart. And he's gone on to actually mentoring a whole generation of new physicians, practitioners in drug abuse. So I think we, as an extended family, we have done well. I'm having trouble advancing the picture. Can I have the next? Okay. So what happened to the old guys in the meantime? Well, Doug is still hanging there, and Rick and I, of course, clean out our bookshelves, getting ready for retirement, see? So we clean out our bookshelves, and you see that we're now getting birthday cards from our grandchildren. And Max, he's trying to decide whether to be a dog trainer or do something with a stethoscope. And Rick and I, of course, are taking on a new job of babysitting the grandkids. And we're still doing it our different way, by the way. He's his way of doing things, babysitting the kid. I got my way of babysitting the kids. So, we are down to the end of the thing. So at the end of the day, what really are important things? Come back to say what it's all about. Well, my mother would say it's all about people resource. And in fact, is there a plan or no? No. She would say, well, have a plan, but don't insist on it, really. Everywhere I went, I seemed to have a plan, but it never seemed to be what actually happened, And she would say a wide river doesn't remember where it begins. It's always go back to appreciate the people that really they make things happen for you. She would say, yes, have gas at home. That way you have hopes when you travel. And I think my mother would say, we repeat our parents and we repeat ourselves. And we pass on, I think it was Sigmund Freud actually, who said, life is a repetition neurosis. You know? So we repeat, and we were disciples, and then we were co-workers or fellow laborers, and now we become mentors. And every time I think about people like my mother and Jim Craig, I always remember Fred Burney. You know, now, how many of you know Fred Burney? Okay, how about Walter Cronkite? Why Walter Cronkite? Okay. Now, according to Walter Cronkite, he would never have become a journalist if it weren't for Fred Burney, who taught him journalism in high school. So, what's in the bottle cap? Well, here it says, it's not from my mother, it's from Cato. It says, I would rather the man would say why a statue wasn't erected in my honor than why one has. Now, my mother would say, okay, kid, do your work, don't get carried away, you know. But now that I'm here, become Americanized, I've become a completely shameless promoter of my own book. So that's what happened to you along the way. So with that, I said thank you for sticking around, and enjoy Montreal. Have a good day. Thank you.